Father and son vanished in Alaska wilderness. 10 years later, hikers stumble upon chilling discovery. For 10 long years, the Jensens' disappearance remained a mystery. Their loved ones held onto hope, tirelessly searching for any sign of their whereabouts. Then, in a twist of fate, hikers exploring the area near Tbay Lake stumbled upon a chilling discovery: remnants believed to belong to the Jensens. The eerie find included personal belongings and clues that hinted at the tragic fate of the father and son. Local authorities were immediately notified, and the investigation was reignited. The news spread like wildfire across Alaska, echoing through radio stations, evening broadcasts, and the hushed conversations of neighbors in Fairbanks, the town where John Jensen and his young son Michael once lived. People remembered the Jensens vividly. John was not just another outdoorsman. He was a man who knew the land better than most. A former guide, he had led countless tourists into the Alaskan backcountry, showing them its breathtaking beauty while warning them of its dangers. His son Michael, just 12 at the time, had inherited his father's adventurous spirit. On that fateful autumn morning in 2015, father and son had packed their gear, smiling as they waved goodbye to Elaine, John's wife, and Michael's mother before driving north toward the unyielding wilderness around Tbay Lake. They were supposed to return by Monday, but they never did. Search teams scoured the forests, helicopters hovered over the treetops, and volunteer groups braved the freezing nights calling out their names. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and then silence. It was as though the Alaskan wilderness had swallowed them whole, leaving behind nothing but heartache and unanswered questions. For years, Elaine Jensen lived in a purgatory of hope and despair. Every knock on the door made her heart race. Perhaps news had come at last. Every phone call jolted her from restless sleep, only to end in disappointment. She kept Michael's room just as he had left it, the shelves stacked with books about constellations, the model airplane he had built with his father hanging from the ceiling, its wings gathering dust. Each year, on the anniversary of their disappearance, the community held a vigil, lighting candles and releasing lanterns into the night sky. "Come home," Elaine would whisper into the cold wind, her voice trembling. "Just come home." But the forest remained silent. The only answers were the howls of wolves, the crack of ice on the lake, the indifferent chorus of nature that offered no comfort. So when the hikers stumbled upon Michael's backpack and John's compass buried beneath layers of moss and soil, it was as if a ghost had suddenly spoken after a decade of silence. The backpack was small, faded, but unmistakable. It still bore the superhero patches Michael had stitched on with his mother's help. Inside were pencils, a half-filled notebook, and childish sketches of trees, lakes, and campfires. One page, water-stained but legible, read, "Dad says we'll be fine. The stars look pretty tonight." The discovery struck a nerve deeper than anyone expected. For investigators, it was evidence. For Elaine, it was a message from the past, a fragment of her son's voice carried across time, telling her he had once looked up at the night sky with hope even as the wilderness closed in around them. Authorities quickly secured the site, yellow tape strung between trees, boots sinking into the damp ground as officers combed through the area. Cadaver dogs were brought in, circling and sniffing, their handlers tense with anticipation. The air itself seemed heavy, charged with a presence that made the forest eerily still, as though it resented the intrusion. Reporters flocked to the scene, their cameras flashing, their voices sharp with the urgency of breaking news. Headlines blared across the nation. Clues found in 10-year-old Alaska. Mystery. Television anchors spoke of the Jensens with solemn faces, while experts speculated on survival against impossible odds. For Fairbanks, the discovery reignited not just grief, but old fears. Parents recalled warning their children never to stray too far from camp, telling them stories of hunters who went missing, of cabins found abandoned with meals still on the table. The Jensens case had always been more than a tragedy. It had become a symbol of Alaska's merciless wilderness, of how quickly even the strongest could vanish. Yet now, with evidence in hand, whispers turned to questions darker than before. If the Jensens had died naturally, why had their belongings remained hidden for so long? Why hadn't earlier searches uncovered them? And if they hadn't died by nature's hand, then whose hand had reached into their lives and torn them away? as Elaine clutched her son's recovered notebook at the police station, tears streaming down her face. She whispered, "He was out there. He was writing. He was alive for some time." Her words echoed in the sterile room, drawing silence from the officers around her. For the first time in years, there was something tangible, something that spoke not only of death, but of survival. And with that survival came tormenting questions. How long had Michael lived after his father vanished? What had he seen? Who or what had he feared in those final days? The investigation, once cold, was now burning with urgency, the flames of truth flickering against the shadows of the unknown. The reopening of the Jensens case brought a wave of both relief and dread to the town of Fairbanks, as well as to the investigators, who had once combed those same woods with nothing to show for it but exhaustion and heartbreak. This time, however, the evidence was undeniable. Detective Sarah McAdams, who had been a rookie officer during the original search in 2015, was now a seasoned investigator leading the charge. She stood at the edge of Tbay Lake, the wind cutting across the dark waters, and felt a strange weight in her chest. 10 years had passed, and yet the forest looked untouched by time, as though it had been waiting for them to return. "The woods don't forget," she muttered, her boots sinking into the damp earth as she surveyed the search area. Her team moved methodically, gritting the terrain, while cadaver dogs sniffed and pawed at the ground. The first major discovery came on the third day, when a dog barked furiously near a slope. Investigators rushed over and unearthed fragments of bone, partially buried beneath layers of soil and pine needles. Forensic tests later confirmed what many had feared: it was John Jensen. The news struck the community like lightning. Vigils were held, candles flickering in the icy air as Elaine wept openly, clutching photographs of her husband. But even as the town mourned, one chilling question remained: where was Michael? Sarah knew the boy's absence was not a simple oversight. The belongings had told a story. Michael had survived for at least some time after his father's death. His notebook entries, childish though they were, revealed nights spent under starlight, days marked by a fragile hope that his father's guidance would see them through. But if John was dead, how long had Michael been alone? And what had ended his story? The forensic report on John's bones deepened the mystery further. At first glance, the markings looked like damage caused by scavenging animals, a common fate for the lost in Alaska. But closer analysis revealed otherwise. The cuts were sharp, deliberate, consistent with a blade. Someone had carved into John's remains. Sarah felt the knot in her stomach tighten as she studied the photos. This wasn't the wilderness. This was human intervention. Someone had been there with them. Someone who had made sure John would never leave. Theories began to swirl within the investigation unit and far beyond. Some spoke of rogue hunters who resented outsiders in their territory. Others whispered about off-the-grid hermits who lived in the shadows of the wilderness, men who had long abandoned civilization and turned feral. And then there were the darker rumors, rooted in Alaskan folklore cults that worshipped the forest, old rituals that demanded sacrifice, tales locals had always told in hushed voices around campfires. Despite her skepticism, Sarah couldn't ignore what the evidence suggested: the discovery of a rusted hunting knife, its blade still stained dark with blood, only added to the horror. Found lodged inside a hollow tree a mile from the lake, it seemed deliberately hidden, as if someone had wanted it to remain buried until nature itself erased it. Forensic tests confirmed it wasn't rust, the stains were human blood, degraded but traceable, though DNA was too damaged to give a conclusive match. The presence of the knife in such proximity to John's remains was damning. Reporters latched onto the finding instantly. Headlines screamed across the nation: "Foul play suspected in Jensens case." Talk shows debated endlessly. Some suggested John had harmed his own son in a twisted act of survival. Others claimed both father and son had been victims of a predator lurking in the woods. Each theory was worse than the last, feeding the frenzy of a public desperate for answers. Meanwhile, Elaine could barely stand beneath the crushing weight of it all. She had spent 10 years in limbo, clinging to faint hope her son had survived. Now she was forced to reckon with the unbearable possibility that he had not only died, but had suffered at the hands of something unspeakable. "I just want the truth," she told the press, tears cutting lines down her face. "Even if it destroys me, I need to know what happened to my boy." The investigation pressed deeper into the wilderness. Sarah's team mapped caves, riverbanks, and remote clearings, leaving no stone unturned. It was in one of these hidden corners of the forest that they stumbled upon a collapsed wooden shack, half buried under creeping moss and shadowed by towering pines. The wood was charred black, as if fire had gutted it years ago, but enough remained to tell it had once been lived in. Inside, the team uncovered rusted cans, torn scraps of clothing, and, most disturbingly, crude carvings etched into the walls. The symbols were strange interlocking circles, jagged lines, runes no linguist could immediately identify. Some carvings were weathered, their edges dulled by time, but others were alarmingly fresh, the grooves sharp, as if cut only a year or two before. Someone had been there long after the Jensens disappeared, someone who still walked these woods. As the investigators sifted through the ash, they found a tin box buried beneath the debris. Inside were fragments of photographs, burned and torn. Some showed hunters posing proudly with game. Others captured children standing at the edges of the forest, their faces blurred, their expressions hauntingly wide-eyed. None were identifiable, but the scrawled dates on the back aligned with the year of the Jensens' disappearance. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine as she flipped through the charred fragments. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. The shack, the knife, the photographs all pointed to something organized, deliberate. This wasn't just an accident, she said quietly to her team, her voice trembling with restrained fury. The Jensens weren't alone out here. They were taken. The words echoed in the silence of the burned-out shack, reverberating against the carved symbols that seemed to watch them from the walls. Outside, the forest was still, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes lingered just beyond the tree line, waiting, listening. As night fell and the wind howled through the branches, her team set up camp, their radios crackling with static, their nerves stretched taut. And then, as Sarah sat by the fire reviewing Michael's notebook once more, her gaze landed on a line that seemed to pierce through time itself. Dad says we're not alone. He hears them at night. Investigators, journalists, and even conspiracy theorists descended upon Tbay Lake once news of the discovery broke. What had begun as a quiet summer hike by two friends now spiraled into a nationwide story. The Jensens, once just another missing persons case buried in police archives, had suddenly returned to the public consciousness. Questions echoed everywhere. What had truly happened that night a decade ago? Was it merely a tragic accident in one of the harshest environments on Earth? Or was there something darker lurking behind the silence of Alaska's wilderness? The belongings discovered by hikers provided tantalizing hints but no concrete answers. Torn fabric that seemed to deliberate in its rips. A pocket knife lodged in the soil as though it had been dropped in haste. Scraps of a journal smeared by years of rain and decay. Words barely decipherable but carrying ominous fragments like not alone. And they're close. Each piece of evidence deepened the enigma rather than resolving it. The local community, long haunted by the Jensens' disappearance, now found itself divided. Some believed the remnants proved a brutal accident, father and son lost in the merciless storms, their supplies dwindling until desperation claimed them. Others whispered of foul play, insisting that the torn journal entries and scattered belongings suggested a chase, perhaps even murder. Then there were the more chilling theories that the wilderness itself had turned hostile, as if an unseen presence drove the Jensens deeper until they could not return. Old legends resurfaced, tales of the silent ones that native hunters spoke of. Spirits said to guard the land around Tbay Lake, punishing those who trespassed too far. Authorities dismissed such talk, yet even seasoned rangers admitted there was something unsettling about the location where the items were found. Compass needles wavered, radios crackled with static, and an eerie silence seemed to hang over the forest, broken only by the wind through dead branches. Search teams who revisited the area reported feeling watched, though no tracks but their own marked the mud. In the end, despite months of renewed investigation, no bodies were ever recovered. The belongings were catalogued, the journal placed in evidence, but closure remained elusive. The Jensens family, those who had waited 10 long years, received back fragments of the past but no real answers. The father's brother spoke to the press, voice trembling. We prayed for truth, Instead, we are given shadows, and yet, perhaps it was fitting. Alaska's wilderness is not a land that yields its secrets easily. It swallows men whole, erases footsteps, buries stories beneath snow and silence. The discovery at Tbay Lake did not solve the mystery. It deepened it, ensuring that the Jensens' tale would echo in campfire whispers and late-night retellings for decades to come. For some, the case was a reminder of human fragility before nature's vastness. For others, it was a warning that certain places are not meant to be trespassed, that the land remembers every footprint, and sometimes it takes more than it gives back. And so, the Jensens live on not as names on a cold case file, but as a haunting legend of the Alaskan wild, father and son, vanished into the silence, leaving behind only fragments to chill the living.